We're briefly going to look at Russia today, and then we're going to spend just a little time in Ezekiel 38, Daniel 8, and we're going to set ourselves the task of asking whether is Putin go. So that's what we want to do. So Russia today, nothing has changed, but everything's changed. And what do we mean by that? If I said to you, Russia today, nothing's changed, but everything's changed, what might that statement mean to you? And we just want to read from this preface to start with, from a book written by an English history professor, and this is out of the preface of the book, Russia's Empires, Their Rise and Fall from Prehistory to Putin. And in this preface, which was written in 2006, this is what he said. A fifth Russian empire is now under construction. Until a few months ago, that prospect seemed almost impossible, almost improbable, if not impossible. The Soviet Union had collapsed, parts of it had been absorbed into the EU, and the USSR was being carefully dismantled. Brzezinski, who was a man who understood geopolitics and was a driver of US foreign policy for a number of years about containment of Russia, remarked that without Ukraine, Russia could not be an empire. And most experts echoed Robert Cottrell's conclusion that Moscow could no longer seriously hope to regain any of the ground lost in the past 15 years. And then he adds this little paragraph: a sober assessment of realities in the light of the past might have been a surer guide. In other words, if those men had understood history, they perhaps wouldn't have made those statements. The new Russian Empire will not be like the last, he said in 2006, but it will be a sphere of influence, as is the American. And then he added, it may not need force of arms in order to grow. Now we would have read that, brothers, and we would have thought about Ezekiel 38, and we would have realised that there will be force of arms. And so that's what when we make that statement, nothing's changed. When we come to Ezekiel 38, and we look at it in the light of history, it's almost what we would expect to happen. But something has changed, and this is what's changed. That Russia has changed its outlook on the West. It's gone from convergence to confrontation. And this is a paper by a think tank out of England, Chatham House, challenging the post-Cold War security order. This report examines 4 key questions. What's caused this challenge? Where's Russia heading? What are the possible geopolitical consequences of this in the widest sense? And at the tactical and strategic levels, how should the West act and react? In other words, this was after the events in Ukraine. So they said that now we're facing a Russian challenge. And then a year later, they produced this report, which was now, of course, after the Syrian intervention. And in the summary, the report is Russia's new tools for confronting the West. And basically it was a report saying there's nothing new. They're using the same techniques they used in the Soviet times. That's why there's a wee commas around the word new. There's nothing new about what they're doing. So here's the summary. In the last 2 years, Russia has demonstrated its return to an assertive foreign policy by successful military intervention in Ukraine and Syria. The capabilities it employed to do so surprised the West, despite being well advertised in advance and their development described in detail by the Russian watching community in Western nations. In other words, they said it was going to happen, but nobody was actually listening. 2 specific tools for exercising power demand close study: the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the state's capacity for information warfare. In both of these fields, Russia's capabilities have developed rapidly in recent years, and notice what it says, to match its persistent intentions. So those are written by men out of think tanks that spend their life analysing what's going on in the nations. And then this last one here, cross-domain coercion, the current Russian art of strategy. This paper makes three arguments. The nuclear component is an inseparable part of Russia's operational art. It cannot be analysed as a standalone issue. They have 5,000 strategic nuclear weapons they can use on the battlefield. The current cross-domain coercion campaign is an integrated whole of types of non-nuclear, informational and nuclear types of deterrence and compellence. The campaign contains a holistic informational operation. It's waged simultaneously on the digital technology, in other words hacking, and the cognitive psychological fronts. That's misinformation. It mucks around with your thinking, which skillfully merges military and non-military capabilities across nuclear, conventional and sub-conventional domains. That's written by a Jewish professor who's written 2 books in 2006, 2012, prizes for best academic works on Israeli security. So what it's saying there is nothing's changed when we look at things historically, but everything's changed. That Russia's gone from a convergence, this was around about 2003, to open confrontation. And it talks about, those men talk about, well, what are Russia's intentions? So there, Russia today, nothing's changed, but everything's changed. Now, so in one of those things it says, challenging the post-Cold War security order. And here's 2 quotes. Borders cannot be redrawn at the barrel of a gun. That's Barack Obama, 3rd of September 2014. And this is Putin. We cannot, of course, forget the events of the Crimea. And I wish once again to thank our armed forces. Can you see a difference there? So Barack Obama says you can't redraw a border at the barrel of a gun. Putin says, I want to thank the armed forces. We've redrawn the borders. And so what we want to ask ourselves, is Putin Gog? You see, challenging the post-Cold War security, something's changed out there, and I don't think the West is really caught up yet and understands what has changed. Maybe the problem will go away. So you see, brothers and sisters, we think about it like this. Phase 1, consolidation of Russia, 16 years of preparation. Phase 2, confronting the West, redrawing borders. Phase 3, Armageddon. I mean, it's much easier now for us to draw the dotted lines together. And you see the change amongst the nations themselves. When Putin went to the G20 in Australia last year, he was a pariah. No one would even speak to him. Obama called him a jackass for his work in Ukraine. But this year at the G20 in China, he meets with the Chinese premier. He's talking to Erdogan meeting with him on the side, the premier of Turkey. He's meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi there as well. And when he meets with Obama, there's a picture I'll show you later on where he's just staring him down. And that's in 2 years. And in the Middle East, he stopped the regime change in Syria. Israel meets with them to cooperate with operations in Lebanon and Syria. He cooperates with Iraq. He meets with the Saudis. He cooperates with Iran. Common interests, he says to the Iranians. We both hate, he says, the US. We've got common ground, even though we disagree about what's actions in Syria. And yet he's talking there with the Iranians, and yet he's meeting now with the Saudi prince, the Crown Prince of Saudi, who's a Sunni, because they've got common interests, because both of those nations are bleeding because of the low price of oil. So you see there's a change. There's been a big change. And you see what we want to say, brothers and sisters, is have we got, when we look at the world events and we look at Putin, have we got the measure of that man? And that's what we want to do. We want to look at these two chapters, Ezekiel 38 and Daniel chapter 8. Because we're all familiar with Ezekiel 38. And we'll go there, and we're just only going there to prove one point. But if we want to understand Gog and the measure of Gog, we have to be equally familiar with the latter part of Daniel chapter 8. Because we've got more detail about him in Daniel 8 than what we do in Ezekiel 38. So that's what we want to do. We just want to look at those two chapters, and we want to then take out of them the characteristics of Gog. Then we want to go back to Daniel 8 and look at the timing issue. And then we want to just finish briefly saying, well, if that's a timing issue, how are we living our lives? We just want to finish in Habakkuk chapter 2 to see what should our attitude be when we see that these events are upon us. So when we come to Ezekiel 38, we see, of course, that it's simply divided up into four, because the other four sections where it says, "Thus saith Adonai Yahweh." So four sections straight away in the chapter. And of course, when we look at those sections, what we find is, of course, in the first section, it's Yahweh telling Gog what he's going to do with Gog. He's going to put a hook in his jaw and bring him down into the Middle East. He tells him that he has to make preparation and so forth. And he's going to be visited in the latter days. But then in the next section, it tells us what Gog will do, this thought that will come into his mind. So the first two sections there are all about Gog. If you ask, and I'll show you that in a moment, because if you just talk to someone and say, well, what's Ezekiel 38 about? And most people say, well, it's about Russia. It's Russia combining nations and bringing them down to the Middle East. But you see, if you look there, that's how many references there are in those first two sections to Gog. 27. So when we look at Ezekiel 38 at that level, we're simply saying it's about a man. It's about what a man's going to do. It's all about Gog's armies. It's like you just read it, and you see it straight away. I'll bring thee forth, all your army. You prepare and be prepared. All the company that you have assembled, and you be a guard unto them. After many days you will be visited. So when you look at it from that point of view, in that sense, brothers and sisters, it's about what a man's going to do. We know who that is. That's Gog. That's what he's going to accomplish. So in the chapter there, he's at the centre. We ask ourselves what the second part about. It's about how Yahweh feels about it. It says there, don't you know when my people dwelt safely? You're going to come against my people. I will bring thee against my land. I'm going to be sanctified in thee. And it's going to be my fury, my jealousy, my wrath. I will be sanctified in the sight of all nations. So when we look at the chapter like that, we just see it's two protagonists. And so that's why we went to Ezekiel 38, because what we want to, the lesson we just want to take from it, from that level is, it's about a man. And it's not, the word tells us it's not difficult to work out who that is. He's the Prince of Rosh. And so that's why we want to ask ourselves the question, is Putin Gog? And draw some inferences from Ezekiel 38 and now Daniel 8. Now, when I was listening to the reading in Daniel 8, do you know what's in Daniel 8? Do you know how the chapter works? And what the details are in the chapter? Because when I was listening to the reading, I thought, the thing is, it's so complicated. I remember when I first came to Daniel 8 years ago, I thought, what is all this about? So what I'm trying to try and do is just show you very simply and very quickly what this chapter's about. Now you see the blue, that's the vision Daniel received. He's given a vision. It's about the nations. And there it is, we read it. But he doesn't understand what the vision is. And so that's the yellow part there. When he says, I don't understand this vision. And the last part is when Gabriel tells him, this is what the vision's about. But what he does is this, and I'll show you this there, is that when he sees the vision to start with, it's in a historical sequence. I'll show you that. But when he explains the vision, he says this is going to be the vision, it's a horn power, but I'm going to explain to you what it will be at the end of that horn power in time. Not when the vision's explained to him, because there's two phrases there which we'll come to, and he says, I'm going to show you what's going to be at the last end of the indignation, for the time appointed for the end shall be. And you can take four key words out of here: vision, time appointed, time of the end. There's four of them anyway, and they're all in Habakkuk. So we know straight away that this section, this last part of Daniel 8, aligns exactly with Habakkuk 2 and 3. It's at the time of the end. And that's why it's not complicated. And I just want to show this show this, brothers and sisters. Now look, the first part of the vision is simply a historical sequence. And what it is, it's a sequence from the times of the Persians with Cyrus. Cyrus was the ram, Alexander was the he-goat, and then out of his head he had a horn, it was broken off, and four horns came up. There was the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, but then this one horn came out of there, which was the development of the Roman Empire, the imperial side of the Roman Empire. The little horn is Roman. And we know that because when we see what it does, it's easy to understand. Don't worry about the detail of the historical sequence. What does the horn do? Well, look what it does. It waxes towards the pleasant land. It's unto the host of heaven. It magnifies itself against the prince of the host. That's our Lord Jesus Christ. And by it the daily was taken away. And the reason why was because the host was given over to the Roman power because of transgression. So you see, brothers and sisters, when we want to identify, well, what horn power did that? What horn power magnified itself against the prince of the host? It was Rome. Which power took away the daily sacrifice in AD 70? It was Rome. And the reason why Rome did that was because the host, and it was the host of heaven, it was the host which Yahweh had brought out to manifest his name. It came against that host because of its transgression. Now that's simple and straightforward, isn't it? It's not complicated. You go, well, what's the horn power? Well, it did that. You can identify it easily. It's the imperial power of Rome. But when we come to the explanation, it's different. Because when Gabriel talks to Daniel, he says, look, and we can understand this when we see what he says, I'm not going to tell you about the historical sequence. I'm going to tell you about the end of this horn power. When in the time of indignation, at the end. Now you see that word at the end there twice in Ezekiel 38. On both sides. Remember it was in 4 there, that side and that side. It's mentioned there twice in Ezekiel 38. And when we see the time of indignation and the appointed time, it says the king of fierce countenance shall stand up. But notice what it says. He'll stand up against not the prince of the host, he'll stand up against the prince of princes. So Christ has returned as the prince. He's raised up the multitude of princes. They will stand up against Christ and the saints. But he will be broken without hand. It's Daniel chapter 2. And when the transgressors have come to the full, that's the nations. So you can see that, brothers and sisters. It's not complicated when you look at it in that simple manner. What did the horn power do? So what it is it's Rome in its first manifestation in that sense, if we want to call it. Well, how did Russia then become Rome? Rome was the imperial power. It became Christianised under Constantine. The emperor moved the capital to Constantinople, and then it was Christianised. But in that there was where the emperors ruled, allowing the power of Rome to come up in the west. It was in the imperial capital of the Roman Empire in that sense, a Christianised Roman Empire. But what happened about 1000 AD was that Christian missionaries went north up into Russia, and they Christianised the Russians. So here there's this painting, the baptism of Rus. It was a beginning event, this mass baptism when Vladimir baptised his family and basically the whole nation in the river outside Kiev, Ukraine, in 988. 1000 there. And so Russia was Christianised. So when Constantinople fell to the Turks, Russia became the inheritor of that Byzantine heritage. And that's why Russia and Moscow is called the Third Rome. In fact, you can find writing of a Russian Eastern Orthodox monk where he says there'll be 3 Romes and not a 4th. And Russians understand this. Putin's talking about what he's doing in Ukraine. The Russians understand this from their history, but the West doesn't. Because in the West, religion's history. That's what they used to do. And so quite often when Western commentators and that are looking at Russia, they don't understand what Russia stands for. And they don't understand the power of the Orthodox Church in Russia. And so that's how Russia becomes the end of that Roman horn. But you see those circles on there? Notice this. Ezekiel 38 is about an individual, a prince of Rosh, what he will accomplish, what he will do, what God will do with him. And when you look here, you see the horn power of Rome, and in its historical sequence, it was Augustus that stood up against the prince of the host, but it was Titus that took away the daily. But when we come here to the latter part, it's just a king who stands up. It's an individual. So, of course, that's what we see there, a king of fierce countenance, not a series of kings, one king. And so when we go, who is this king that will stand up, we know, therefore, that it's Gog. So when we understand that, brothers and sisters, and we can take some characteristics out of Ezekiel 38 and examine them and say, well, is Putin Gog? When we turn here to Daniel 8, look at the number, the characteristics that's describing that king. He's got a fierce countenance. That's the same as Deuteronomy 28. No thought for the young or old. He's skilled in intrigue, both in business and diplomacy. He's mighty in capacity, but not by his own power. He'll corrupt and destroy to an extraordinary degree. He'll prosper and perform his will. He'll destroy the mighty and the people of the holy ones. That's future. the nation of Israel. He will be cunning and cause deceit to prosper in his hand. He'll magnify himself in his heart. He'll destroy many that are at ease. So what we see there, brothers and sisters, is a lot of detail. More detail than what you'll find in Ezekiel chapter 38. If we want to ask ourselves the question, is Putin Gog? And so that's what we just want to do now for a moment. When we go back to Ezekiel 38, I do want to show you this, because when you see it, you'll go, oh my goodness. When we come to Ezekiel 38, these are perhaps we know the chapter well, and so these are some of the ideas that we can take out of that. He's the Prince of Rosh, so he rules like a Tsar. He takes other people's resources and uses them for himself. As he gathers those nations together. And he uses those resources for himself. He's despotic because he imprisons, be thou guard. So he puts nations in prison in that sense and then bends them to his will. And the thing is, you think about this, you think about how do those living in the Baltic states feel today? When Putin says we can be in the Baltic states in 24 hours, how do they feel about that? Or when he moved into Ukraine, Poland went hysterical. And Putin's cruel and rapacious. He attacks others that are weaker than himself with overwhelming force. That's what we're just drawing out of Ezekiel 38. He's covetous and greedy. He's a meticulous planner. See, here's an example of imprisoning others and taking their resources. Does anyone recognise who that is? I thought I had a note here on it, but Michael Khodorkovsky. When Putin came to power in Russia, we'll see later on, no one even knew who he was. The oligarchs ruled Russia. Michael Khodorkovsky was the wealthiest oligarch of them all. He owned this massive oil company. He'd got it through deceitful means when the Soviet Union fell through, but that didn't matter. He was a billionaire. I don't know how many billion it is. He was the wealthiest man in Russia. When Putin came to power, we'll see he didn't have too much weight to start with in Russia. But he had one card, the power of arrest. He gathered the oligarchs up to Moscow and he says, it's business as usual, but don't meddle in politics. But what Khodorkovsky did was he started talking to George Soros. He was talking to an American company. He was going to pump his oil across Russia and so forth, and he was going to work with the Americans. All Putin did was, he was in his private jet in Siberia up there somewhere. Putin arrested him, flew him back to Moscow, threw him in prison. Trumped up, or you've got a problem here, tax. You haven't been paying the government any tax. And in Russia, the judicial system works hand in glove with the government, or whoever's paying the most. So what happened was he spent 10 years in prison, and then Putin pardoned him, and he got out of Russia to Switzerland. But what Putin then did was, with those who associated with him, they dismembered his oil company and spread it out amongst themselves. He was the richest man in Russia. And that's what he ended up happening to him. That's what Putin's like. That's an example of Putin. So you take that, brothers and sisters, and you bring it out into the international arena. There's this other one, and Brother Brian talked about this. That's Grozny. When Putin came to power, no one knew who he was. He was Prime Minister first, but to show Russia that he was a strong leader, the FSB orchestrated the apartment bombings, and so people say, the apartment bombings in Moscow, so that Russia could attack Chechnya again. And this was to demonstrate that Putin was a strong leader that the Russians could trust in. There's the result. And this one here. How much are you worth, Mr. Putin? Well, Forbes put his wealth conservatively at 40 billion. But I can't remember the name. Bill Browder, who was invested in Russia heavily in those transition years and made a fortune, and then fell out with Putin and was sent back to England, don't come back to Russia again, says he's worth 200. Okay, there's someone, I just took it off the net. He earns 170,000 a year, he's got 180,000 in the bank, but from Gazprom, he owns 1.5% of it, 150, I don't know what that is there, 1.5 billion. There's other there. So what we're saying is, he knows how to do business. Oh, you think, Donald the Trump, the deal maker, he'd be carved in Russia in 5 minutes. Once you look and read how things work in Russia, Russia doesn't work like any other state. Explain what that means. You see, in Russia, there's what's known as the formal system. That means you have a president at the top, and you have the Duma and the parliament, you have regional governors, and you have laws and courts. That's called the formal system. But no one keeps the formal system in Russia. It runs on informal rules. And informal rules means if you've got more money, you've got more power. If you want to buy something or buy someone off, you just buy them off. If you want to own a business and run a business, you pay the person next up. It's called rent. And when Putin came to power, oligarchs ruled Russia. When Putin had finished a few years later, he was the oligarch of Russia. But you see, brothers and sisters, just trying to say, this is the measure of the individual. So like I said, Russia works on those informal rules. And what I want to show you later on is how quickly that man adapted to his new situation every time he moved up the ladder. You take a KGB agent in eastern Germany, 25 years later, he's possibly the richest man in the world. What sort of capacity is that? So here's these characteristics in Ezekiel 38. But you see, there's a problem there in that sense, brothers and sisters. We're going, is Putin go? But there's a problem, we've got a problem, because you see, any Russian ruler would be like that. Any Russian ruler that comes up is going to rule like a Tsar. He's going to take other people's resources. It's going to be cruel. That's what the Russians are like. That's just how they operate. So you see, if we go to Ezekiel 38, in that sense, we can't answer that question, is Putin Gog, because that what's described to us in Ezekiel 38 could just provide somebody else. But when we come to Daniel 8, we've got much more information. And so we're told the saints that this whole list down here, rules like a king and so forth. There's the list. You can go to Daniel 8 and you can write those things out for yourself. There's the characteristics of Gog. And so you look at those characteristics, brothers and sisters, and you go, of all the characteristics that we're given, say there's 9 there, or 6 or so many that we can draw out of Ezekiel 38, there's 14 or 15 characteristics that we can see in those 2 chapters. Which one of those characteristics would definitely prove to us that Putin's Gog? Which 4? And these are 4. This is what I see, brothers and sisters. So I'll put 4 there for you and I'll see what you think. So, unique characteristics that would make Putin Gog. The horn power of Daniel 8 and the outcomes of Ezekiel 38 are embodied in a man, in an individual. And Gog is the man at the centre of those events. He's central. one of the quotes there, he magnifies himself in his heart. He's mighty in capacity, but not in his own power. And he shall prosper and perform his will. Now, what I want to do, brothers and sisters, is show you that I think that those characteristics there, we can never be sure, but you can go to 98%. And these four characteristics here, we'll just look at them and see what you think. He's at the centre. So here it is. Here it is here. So here's just someone, this is from that same Chatham House. I just took it out of one of those reports. You can just draw that down off the internet. Here's 70 pages about what Russia's doing here. The reports are 70 pages long. You can read through them and fetch out as much detail as you like. As a community, we've got more information today than any other ecclesia has ever had. You can go on the internet and I can tell you what picture Putin's got in his anteroom. If you're going in to meet the President of Russia, in that anteroom you're going to be staring at a picture of a Tsar. Because Putin is modelling himself on that Tsar, Nicholas I. It's just information on the internet. And someone makes a comment upon it. Well, this is what he's doing. Strong central government, bolstering up the FSB. But in the time of Nicholas I, Russia was respected internationally. Putin is angry and resentful. He's seething with resentment against the West because they have belittled him and belittled him and belittled him. And when a person seethes with anger and resent, he's no different to Alexander. His feet, it says, hardly touch the ground. He is full of anger against the Persians. So here it is. And this phrase says, I've drawn heavily on the words of Putin because he's the embodiment of the regime and its key decision maker and spokesman. That's just making a comment. He's just writing about it. You see, brothers and sisters, when you're reading through all this information, things just jump out at you. And here, this is on all important issues, the Russian political system is driven by one and only one decision maker, Vladimir Putin. His power is often likened that to a monarch or a Tsar. You see those men there? Do you recognise them? Medvedev, Ivanov, and Putin. Ivanov's gone now. He makes the decisions. And this one here in 2014, at the Valdai Club in Switzerland, where Putin was interviewed there, and this is where the comment, this is after the Ukraine, where he was seething with resentment, because the West has pursued, because of Brzezinski's geopolitical thing, and it was the proper thing for them to do, to contain Russia all the time, contain it. That's why the US, 1 minute are pushing a button, let's have a reset button, then something goes wrong, contain them. So of course he was resentful about what had happened in Ukraine. A change of government with a Western style government that they might join the EU and then finally NATO. How do you think he felt about that? I'm not saying Putin's an evil man. I'm just saying put yourself in his shoes to understand why he would carry out the actions that he is. And you see what it says there. If there's no Putin, there's no Russia. The search for Russia's national idea, which began with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. When they had the Soviet Union, they knew who they were. They went through a phase of democracy. It didn't work. The nation collapsed. They defaulted on their loans. They didn't know who they were, but now they do. It's finally over their search for their identity. It's evident that Russia's national idea is Vladimir Putin. You see, when you read that, brothers and sisters, and you think about Ezekiel 38, the man. So this one, he magnifies himself in his heart. Now, in Daniel 8, who does that, and if he magnifies himself in his heart, in Daniel 8, who is he being associated with? And here it is. The same language, same words. It was used of Cyrus. It was used of Alexander. Magnified himself exceedingly. It was used of the Roman Empire. It waxed exceedingly great. And it's used of Gog. And so, brothers and sisters, you have to ask yourself, does Putin have the measure of a Cyrus? Does Putin have the measure of an Alexander the Great? Well, this is where he was in May this year. Do you know where that is? Well, I didn't either. I only found out this a few days ago. It's Mount Athos. And the thing is, brothers and sisters, that's the most holy site for Eastern Orthodox Christians. It's just off Greece. Now, Putin's tried to go there 4 times, he's been there twice. Now, he magnifies himself in his heart. Now, you see there where he's standing. It's actually a seat, but he's standing there. That's the seat that the Byzantine emperors sat in when they went to Mount Athos. And as he stands there in that seat, there's celebrating 1,000 years of Russian heritage and Eastern Orthodoxy. 1,000 years, that's what it was, a celebration of. So as he stands there and there's 1,000 years of history running through his system. As he stands there in that place, he understands that this is where the Byzantine emperors sat when they came to Mount Athos. What's he think? I don't know. But he's a man of history. He understands Russia's history and its historical roots. And what the Tsars used to do is no different to what Putin's doing today. They used the Eastern Orthodox Church in that sense, Eastern Orthodox belief, as a cloak for their imperial ambitions. That's why I just took that straight off what someone had written in that article. That's what they did historically. They used Eastern Orthodoxy as a cloak for imperial ambition. Does that sound like Ezekiel 38, Revelation 16? There'll be a justification for invasion. So that's those two. But here's the other two. He's mighty in capacity, but not in his own power. Now, Brother Brian mentioned in his talk that Yahweh raised up Muhammad. And these two last quotes basically say that if we can see that in Putin's life, if Yahweh's raising him up, he's definitely God. And so you look there and you say, well, you look at those two words, there's the word there, strength and power, and all those quotes there, Samson had strength, it's the same word for strength and power. Israel had strength to come into the land, but it was not their own. The Elohim have strength, but it's not their own. The Assyrians described like that in Isaiah 11, it's having strength, but not its own. So is Gog. So you see, that strength can come from providential arrangement in the individual's life. Circumstances just work out. And this last one here is, of course, he's prosperous. Now, the very first time that word's used is in Genesis, when Abram's servant, what was that? Eliezer. Sorry, Eliezer. He was wondering whether Yahweh had made his journey prosperous or not when he went to seek a bride for Isaac. And And then he says, Yahweh before whom I walk will send his angel with thee and prosper thy way. You see, so Gog prospers and he's performing his own will. But the thing is, why and how can he prosper? And you see, the thing is, we're saying there, through providential arrangement in his life. And he must also have the capacity to respond to the providence. It's no good having a providential arrangement in someone's life if they can't do anything. And so you see, brothers and sisters, that is more difficult to discern, isn't it? Because we don't know. And we look at events and we go, well, is that providence or not? So here's Madeleine Albright, just April this year. Putin is smart, but he's truly evil. That's her summation of Putin. A smart individual, but truly evil. She interacted with Putin in the years of Clinton. She was American Secretary of State. There's a picture of her there with him. When asked, her lasting impression was of the young president, that was in those days, she was critical. He's smart but a truly evil man, she said, describing him as a KGB officer and so forth. But look at what she says. Putin's got bad cards, but he plays them well. See, he's got bad cards to play. Now, what cards did he have? Well, you think about these cards that he was dealt in 2000 when he came to power. Who dealt him those cards? This is what he got dealt. He picks up the card off the table, basket case economy. He picks another one up, no respect in the world. He picks another one up, no one even knows who you are in Russia. He picks another one up, you've got oil and gas. He picks another one up, you can enrich yourself beyond your greatest belief. He picks another one up, no military option. He picks the other one up, arrest card. And he's got to play those cards. And how could he play those bad cards so well if there wasn't providence? So you see, brothers, when you look at his life, so here's just an article. It's written by a professor of history. He's an author of a book about Stalin. His first volume, Paradoxes of Power. Do you think that this man, when he looks at Vladimir Putin, might have something interesting to say? He's a professor of history. He's writing volumes about Stalin. Do you think he understands how Russia works? Now, all he's doing here in this article is he's critiquing about 5 or 6 books on Putin. And so you're reading through, and there's things that stand out. Here's 3 of them in that. Okay, here's some, before I just come here, I'll just explain some coincidences in his life. Just coincidences. Okay, when he was young, his favourite film was about a KGB officer who rescued Russia. That's the film he watched when he was a boy. So as soon as he left high school, he rushed down to the KGB. They said, "You're too young, go away and get a degree." He went away and got a law degree. He came back, they said, "You can come and work for us." And of course he would have started as a junior officer in the KGB and so forth. And then he was stationed out in East Germany when the USSR collapsed. So he came back to Russia, he didn't have a job. Coincidence? His old law professor just happened to have scored himself the job of mayor of Moscow, mayor of St. Petersburg, the second biggest city in Russia. So Putin goes to him and says, "Can you give me a job?" He says, "Fine, you can work in the mayor's office." Do you know what he did there? He was in charge of buying in food from Germany to feed Russians who they had no basics at the time. The ruble had collapsed. There were food queues on the streets. He had the business of buying in food from Germany because there were no foreign banks working in Russia then. He'd sell oil and gas and minerals to Germany and get back food. That was his first job. But what happened was you can make a little bit of money on the side, and millions disappeared. You can just read about this. You can find it in this book, that book. Millions of dollars disappeared. Now, he was going to be prosecuted for that, and he would have been thrown in jail. But just by chance, at that moment, I can't remember the name of the thing, Yeltsin's, one of Yeltsin's high-ranking men said, "You come and work in the Kremlin." And he missed the prosecution like that. Now he's up in the Kremlin. And he's working there. And what happened was that Yeltsin and the family had embezzled millions of dollars off Russian people. And he'd come to the end of his presidency. And he needed somebody that would sign off for him. In other words, who could come into office and would waive any prosecution. And Putin had organised for one of the family to get out of Russia, no passports, earlier on. And Yeltsin's and the oligarchs were running Russia. The FSB had been put down like that. That was just called informal rules. They didn't have any. They were there, but of course they didn't have any power because all the power was in those who had the money. That was how Yeltsin ran Russia at the time. But he didn't trust the FSB. So when he found out about this Putin, he put him in charge of the FSB. And this is what this, just reading through this article here, this is what he says. Then in July 1998, lightning struck. Well, what? He's just writing about what happened. And he says, Yeltsin appointed the former lieutenant colonel above hundreds of high-ranking men in the FSB and put him in charge of the FSB. But then what happened was Yeltsin was leaving the presidency. So what the family did was they chose Putin. This person said, "You want to know how Putin came to power? He was selected." You go, "Oh, that just rings a bell." He was selected. The Yeltsin family looked around and said, "We need a man who can come in and do the job and won't cause us any issues." And so he made him Prime Minister. And no one knew who he was. That's when he used the FSB to get the Chechen War kicked off, so that they could vote for a strong leader. No one knew who he was. And then it says this here, but Putin's transformation into a dominant political figure required more than a widely shared appreciation that he was saving the Russian state. It took a surprise economic boom. See that surprise? Economic boom. And so the country came back, and this is another thing. He initiated pro-market reforms. Putin supported and signed them. Ownership of private property and so forth. They changed the tax laws and that, and it was magnified. It says here at that time by favourable trade winds. That's what the writer said. And you see, brothers and sisters, you read those things, and you go, "Is that chance? Is that just circumstance?" Because you see a man come from nowhere, and he comes right up through the Kremlin like that, and suddenly he's president. Just like that. And you look at it and you go, that's remarkable. Well, it is to me, when you see the circumstances of how he became president of the Russian Federation. So you see, here's some photos. Now look, just look at these photos. You see, there he is in St. Petersburg. You see him on the left. He looks like a gormless schoolboy. Do you know, doesn't he? You see him there? He's young. And that's Solchuk. That's his, the guy in the front there, Mayor of St. Petersburg, his old law professor. You see, there's Yeltsin there. He's shaking his hand like that. You see that? You're Prime Minister. And then this next one here, Yeltsin saying, "Bye, we're out of here." That's your new president. He's covering off for the family. You see that? There he is there, look at him. And no one knew who he was. And there he is with George Bush in the car. He's pretty happy at that stage. You see that, brothers and sisters? When you look at his life? How did he go from that to this? Staring down Obama at the last G20. That's it. They had a competition on the internet. I haven't got the photo with Reddit, and everyone did all these posters of this stare down. And you go, did that happen by chance? But now there's a man in Russia who's seething with resentment against the West. A man who's halfway through a huge military reform, and now he's showing the nations his military, what his military can accomplish. And the thing is this, brothers and sisters, you think about it. You think about what he's accomplished in Russia in 14 years. This is here. I'll just read this to you here, if I can just this. Bit by bit, however, using stealth and dirty tricks, Putin reasserted central control over the levers of power within the country. It was a cunning feat of state building, aided by Putin's healthy contrast with yachts and so forth. And some fear of authority was necessary as well. You see what it's saying? How this history professor writing about what happened. And what I'm saying to you, brothers and sisters, is you look at 14 years of what a man accomplished who was a KGB officer in Eastern Germany. In 14 years, he built Russia back. He rebuilt he's been rebuilding the military since 2008, and that rebuild finishes in 2020. And now what he seems to be doing is this. He built a vertical of power. He brought in all his friends from St. Petersburg. They enriched themselves beyond belief. There's about 130 men around him who are billionaires, 100 and that's who America slapped sanctions on. But now he's changing. Just the latest reports of this. He's moving those men out. He's moving in a younger generation who have only ever known him as the leader of the Russian Federation. And he's focusing now not on Russia within. It says he's focusing and he's meeting with the general staff of the army. He's focusing on policy outside of Russia. It's just what you read. And you see, brothers and sisters, so you just go, there's those unique qualities, those 4 qualities there that would make Putin go. But we can't, we can't tell, we don't know for sure. But, brothers and sisters, when I look out there and I think about what's happened, and I think about what's happening with that change where he's used the military option twice and it's been successful, how his diplomacy in the Middle East and so forth, moved into the Middle East when America moved out just so swiftly, the same sort of capacity. I think to myself, Putin must be go. That's my view, my own personal view. He's showing so many of the characteristics. You can tick all the ones in Ezekiel 38 just straight off, like that. But what does that mean for you and me? What does that mean for us? And this is what I think, brothers and sisters, is this. And I'm glad Brother Graham said it and Brother Brian said it. They both said it because I thought, we're so close to the end, you think, am I a nutcase for thinking that? You think Christ's return's so close. I never used to think that. You've been in the Ecclesia so long, and suddenly you're just thinking this. And the thing is this, brothers and sisters, when you come to Daniel 8, you see what happens there, and I'll go, well, here's the timing issue. This is what I think. You see, when Daniel sees the vision, he doesn't understand what it is. Now, he was standing in a certain place. I could tell you where that place is, that the word's used over Scripture. And what happens is, of course, the Elohim are told to tell him what the vision is. Now what happens is, he falls to the ground. The word used is he's terrified. And he's flat on his face. And then he's touched and raised up. And then the vision's explained to him. Now the thing is this, brothers and sisters, we don't need to know that to understand what the vision was about. We didn't need to know that. And the thing is this, did Daniel himself have to be reminded of the power and the majesty of the God he served? Did he have to be reminded as he was touched there was a man greatly beloved? And so, brothers and sisters, that's there. So when you look at that, you think, oh, what's that telling us is that when that king stands up, Daniel's already standing in his lot. So that's you can draw that conclusion there if you want. But if you do draw that conclusion, and you go, well, if that's what Putin's doing now, as he gets back up, if that Putin is go, and if he's doing that now as he gets up off his feet to stand up, how close are we to the return of our Lord Jesus Christ? How close? And that's that word if, we don't know. And that's what I just want to really try and show you, brothers and sisters, if you can see that. You just see that sort of, that picture. And you go, well, how do you feel about that personally? And that's why I just want, there's a summation of what we looked at, but I just wanted to end here in Habakkuk. Because you see, in Habakkuk, there was the prophet Habakkuk. He stood upon that tower, he looked out and he saw tumultuous events. What was going to occur in his own day, and then what was going to occur in the future. And that's what we can see, brothers and sisters. We can see the same thing. We can see tumultuous events coming upon the earth. But how is he to live? And that's what it says there. It says there. You write the vision, it's plain. And not only that, you see the vision, it's for the appointed time. Those words are all out of Daniel 8. At the end it shall speak. Though it tarry, wait for it. And the thing is this, brothers and sisters, so he's told, yes, the vision's going to occur. But the just will live out of the faithfulness of Yahweh. That's all you have to do. You have to trust in the one who's begotten you. You have to trust that all things are in his care. That's all you have to do. You have to watch the events. You can't change the time in which you live. But that's all you have to do. You can look at the events, you can see that it's tumultuous times, but you live out of your faith and your faithfulness. And you just patiently wait. And that's where I wanted to just finish, brothers and sisters, because we go, well, if the return of, how do you fit? No, brothers and sisters, we shouldn't feel any consternation. We shouldn't be distressed. If we're walking before our God, we don't have to feel an ounce of distress. We just wait for the circumstances to come. And that's basically my talk. But brothers and sisters, can you see that picture? Is Putin that man of capacity? You see his capacity now turning into the international arena. Phase 1, consolidation of Russia. phase 2, stepping into the international arena. He'll do anything to stymie the US. And then circumstances, you can see how that and if there's 10-year gap would be the 10 years in which that king stands up and accomplishes those things. So when you read Daniel 8 and you look, if Putin is going, and he's done that already, and this is what's going to happen in the 10 years, the world hasn't seen anything yet. But if the way we view Daniel 8 is right, the saints won't see that. Well, thank you.